afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us this afternoon to discuss the past, present, and very ambitious future of commercial buildings around the world. As our global landscape undergoes transformations, the commercial real estate sector is in the forefront of adaptation and transformations. Commercial buildings have become multifaceted. They've become mixed-use hubs. Joining us today, we have experts with diverse perspectives on commercial buildings. Over to you, Ashley.
I really don't think I need to introduce myself, but I'm Ashley Lane, an architect and partner at Foster & Partners. So when I was asked to talk about the future of the office, I thought, well, we have this saying that in order to look forward, you need to look back. It's one of Lord Foster's favourite comments. So, but it's obviously taken from this man. So I thought you need to really look at the history because things don't happen overnight. There's always occurrences before the main events that sometimes go unnoticed, but can always be seen in hindsight. So, for example, here is the work from home, which started as zero, kicked up in 1973, and then, of course, as we're all very aware of, spiked in 2020. So that's actually, but if you map that against the oil and gas prices, you'll see that actually the spike in 73 and the spike today, they follow the same path. So it's one of the very interesting things that actually there was originally an early 70s push to working from home. And it kind of comes back to this, three things: the behavior of people that work and live, and the behavior of economic models, and also the technology that exists at a given time. So these three things are always working in balance. Sometimes the other two can be pushing on something, but it'll take, in this case, a technological boost, which happened in the 70s and again in the sort of late 2000s, that actually triggers these changes. Can everyone hear me okay? Because I can hear myself. So, for example, 1965, there was effectively zero people working from home in a corporate sense. There was obviously people that had work from home sort of elements, but they weren't working from home in the sense that we would think of it today. 1972, we had the very first telecommunications, or telecommuting as it was called, which effectively is work from home technology in its nascent element. Okay, this is a bit better. And then this happened, 1973, the OPEC oil crisis. And what that meant actually was people couldn't get into work. They couldn't get fuel for the cars. They couldn't actually commute at all. So at the very start of this telecommunications industry boom, we also had an oil and gas crisis. And I love this next one. This is almost something you could put today, basically saying that this was getting people back on their feet. And meant as a joke, but it's very interesting because today, if you sort of said that, it actually is very, very apt to what's going on at the moment. Then 1976, and how many people have hands, you have an Apple device of some sort or another? Because I'm going to sound very biased in this, and I don't mean to be. It's more of a narrative tool than anything else, but sorry to Android users out there. But 1976, the Apple I was released. In 1977, the Apple II was released. And in 1976, at the same time, there were 5 people in IBM and a similar number of people in NASA that were actually working from home. So 10 people were working from home at that time. And there was advertised, though. This is the advertisement in 1976, basically telling everyone, you can all work from home now. You've got this computer, it's portable in a sense. You can take that home and you can sit at home, you can be in your kitchen and you can work. I mean, this is 1976 when this advertisement came out. And 1976, the same year, we opened this building. This is a building it's actually northeast of London in a place called Ipswich. So it was a regional office for Willis, Faber and Dumas, which nowadays is called Willis and Willis, I think, at the moment. So all these images are actually from 1976. I've deliberately done that. But this was the brief at the time, was to basically create a building that wasn't pedestrian. So, for example, the very first office in the world, and this is coming from the client, not from us, because we're not sure about this, that actually featured escalators to get people around. And this is how, at the time, we were promoting buildings with these comics that look like they're out of magazines. It's the idea of a executive crushed into a lift versus happy on the escalator. And this is the escalator. So this is a building from 1976 that has all the high marks of biophilia, transportation, open area, amenity. And this is a view of the rooftop garden and where people ate in the sort of canteen. And actually a pool. So I had a pool inside it. I do have to say in 1991, this pool was covered over. It's still there, but it was covered over because they ran out of space. But the pool is actually still under the floor. And this is not so much about, looks very generic, but I think tomorrow when I show the Bloomberg, you'll see a very similar ceiling actually in Bloomberg. But this was one of the first sort of raised floors that was used in an office sense. Prior to that, they were used in server rooms, that sort of thing. But this is the very first one. And in 1976, the first computer was really released. In 1976, someone had the foresight to say, well, we're going to have a raised floor because this is going to be a thing. We think it's going to be a thing going forward. So let's put the floor in just in case it actually happens the way everyone's saying it's going to happen. And of course, it did happen. The really ironic thing is this, in 1994, I think this building was grade 1 listed. Which actually means you can't change anything now. So it was built to be flexible. It was built to have this sort of movement. The pool could be changed. And then it got grade 1 listed. And no one can do anything to a building that is built to be flexible. So the final picture, this is the rooftop. Yeah. Just a slight sidebar. Again, 1978, a couple of years later. This is Exxon Valdez. And this is them predicting the future. This is on the left-hand side is what they wrote in this report to say that this is where we think the carbon's going. At the time, they had the best, oil and gas had the best environmental engineers and scientists. And they had data modeling all over the world. They had sort of liners and oil rigs that all had sensors on them, and they could tell exactly what was happening with the world. And they've actually come absolutely true. This is from 85 to 77. This is showing just how accurate they were back then and how much they predicted back then and how much they buried back then, because all this never came out. It only recently came out. Similar to the Apple, this is I like this one because it's a really terrible working from home environment. But 1976 was a little bit friendlier. 1981, working from home with Wang. So this is the computer that you're supposed to have at home. And 1984, the first portable computer. So we're kind of working through this. And at the time, there were 1.5 million Americans, so that's just in the US, that were actually working from home. So it's actually sort of coming up. And again, 1986, we built this building, which is, if you imagine the last building that Foster & Partners built was a 3-story building in Ipswich. This is a 44-story building in Hong Kong. And this was sort of built as the best bank building in the world. And it features a lot of the things that we sort of became known for. The services are on the outside, so the inside could be a flexible, changeable floor plate where everyone could see everybody else. There was a sun scoop at the very top that actually sort of directed light all the way down. The sort of the amenity spaces were around, again, escalators. So there was lifts, but escalators got you up to the first level. And this was sort of the open sort of dining area. But most importantly, this was the ground floor, and there's actually a railway line running under here, which is why this is an open space. But the first public space that kind of went into a building. So you're not looking at a building just as something for a corporate identity. You're starting to say to everyone around you, you can use this space as well. Only the ground floor. So this is people picnicking on weekends under the ground floor, under the area I just showed. So again, the public space actually being pulled into a building and used for Chinese New Year and everything else. And then I think 98, the iMac, and interestingly, it wasn't really enough to sell it as sort of working from home. That had already really been done. What they're showing here is Diane Keaton, sort of in her home office, well, in the movie anyway, working at the iMac, and I think everyone probably remembers the iMac. So they're actually sort of pushing this in terms of movies and things as something that you can do. And at the same time, we were working on Frankfurt. Frankfurt's in the CBD of, the Commerce Bank in Frankfurt, directly in the CBD. And the idea behind this building was that actually on each level, there was a triple height nature space, and it rotated around the building on every floor. So everyone that was sitting there could actually look down onto this space. So here you can see this is the sketch, Lord Foster's sketch, and on the right, this is quite a recent photo of how it actually feels like to work in that building and to look out onto this garden space. So you've got that amenity space. And on the ground floor, it is again a public space. It's not quite as public as Hong Kong because it's not open to the outside, but anyone can walk into this, and the people, you can walk into this and you can eat in the same place that the bank people eat. But I think that's up to 86, but what about the future? So I think this is quite interesting. So before COVID, there was a third of people working from home, so quite a big increase. So it wasn't something that happened overnight. After COVID, 2/3. And I think one thing that COVID did was it push-started this, because it basically told executives, hey, it works. You can do this. It's not, technologically, we're there. People can work at home. I mean, how many people here work from home? So everyone. So of course, here we are. We have this great spike, and just to remind you, the technology was there, the economics was there, and the behaviour was most definitely there. And in fact, this is quite interesting, because this is basically telling you that employees think that it was more successful than employers think it was more successful than employees by 12% margin, which it sort of almost doesn't feel right. This is financial security, so there is a sort of a certain bias towards technology. Bloomberg, etc., always uses that technology. But very interestingly, there's actually that sort of push coming from employers. There's lots of reasons for that. It works out it's quite cheap to not have as many people in the office. You can have smaller offices. But yeah. So this is one of the issues, is financial services being one thing. It worked very well. But what about collaboration? And certainly from an architectural point of view, this is what we are finding to be the most difficult thing, is to actually get people around a table, talking, around a drawing, around something else. So it was very interesting when we started this building in 2018, so just before the crisis hit, which was actually sort of all about collaboration. So before this point, everyone had actually worked in very different offices all the way around Cupertino, never in the one space. As they grew, they just bought more and more warehouses and buildings. And I think one very important thing to actually say is this is where Apple started, in a garage. So not even working from home. They did out of a bedroom initially, Steve Jobs' bedroom, and then Wozniak and Steve Jobs in this garage. Which is now a listed garage. But they weren't the first people. In 1940, I think it is, 1939, this was Hewlett-Packard starting out of a garage, which is now a listed landmark in Silicon Valley. So it's very interesting. There's two sort of big corporations that started in very much the same place. You can find similar things from Microsoft, for Pinterest, for GoPro. You can find all the starts started in these sort of incubator-like scenarios. And this is what they were this is Pinterest, this is not Apple, but this is what Apple were all of their people in very different warehouses on their cycles of technology, working out of places like this, where they could drill in the walls, they could put a new cable in, they could hang something off the ceiling, and they kind of loved working like that. And then this is sort of the initial sort of sketches that sort of working towards how do you bring all those people together? What's the best way to bring 12,000 employees all under one umbrella and have them still feel that it's very collaborative. So they bought Hewlett-Packard's, ironically, Hewlett-Packard's sort of site, because Hewlett-Packard were actually downsizing, so they were moving out of there. And they built Apple Park. And one very big difference was not a lot of separate buildings built over time, but really the gravitas to build one big building for every single one of their employees, to make it a green space, to make it an amenity space. And this is the final building. So the idea that they're actually all in that one area. One important thing to note, this is just a video of it being built. So there's, I think, 4,000 concrete beams coming in, all of them hollow, so it drops the weight down, but also works well for the cooling. Each of those sorts of glass, you'll see the glass panels in a sec, is actually 14 meters long, 3 meters high. So this is the 14-meter wide bay and the glass coming in. This is actually carbon fiber. This weighs nothing. It's got a few ton of a ceiling. It's so light that it actually can be dropped on top of plates of glass. So all of the wiring, all of the sprinkler systems, all of the pipes just actually runs up between the glass silicon joint. So in that sense, it really is a transparent building, which is the Apple are very minimalist. Everyone knows, see their phone, they know that they're very minimalist. The least amount of things to do the most amount of effort is what they really are working for. So again, a very different contrast to the buildings they used to be in. And that's one very interesting thing, very minimalist buildings driven by a very minimalistic outlook. So that's the building when it's finished. You can see there's not a single column in there. This is where they actually launched the new products. They actually launched them underneath. You can see the staircase and the lift that goes down. That lift actually spins as it goes down, which is quite amazing. So, launch day, everyone sort of walks into here. And there's the 14-meter wide piece of glass. And the reason for that, that transparency, but also it's California, so it's actually really good environmental sort of balance from inside to outside. So this is our office, and this is actually a section out of that, a one-to-one mock-up, which we do quite often in our office. And you can see that groove over the top of the glass. In most instances, that glass does not move, it can't open. So the air actually goes up over the top, through an insect screen, and then back on the inside. So all those days, and there are a lot of them, when it's the same temperature outside as inside, it just lets the air flow through. It's one of the most naturally ventilated buildings in the world. So then collaborative spaces. So this is, it looks a bit like an Apple store, doesn't it? It's got the same tables as Apple stores. So the idea that everyone sort of meets in these centralized spaces. And sort of that's where people are coming together. There have been a lot of criticisms about the minimalism of this project, and we have to say that was driven from the idea of Apple to actually put that forward as something that was driving them. And you can see here from some of those open spaces and the daylight that really works well. And I have to say, there's 4,000 people can sit in the main cafeteria. So that's really where the driver of everyone is. It's a mile diameter, but the idea is that people have to move. And this sort of comes about from Steve Jobs sort of wanting people to actually move to around during the day, to go and move to eat, to move to work, to move to this. So it's a commute, if you like, but only within a 1 mile diameter. And there are free bikes and everything, but the people can sort of walk from one area. And so the cafeteria has these massive sliding doors that open. They take 12 minutes to open. And I think this is sort of interesting. 1984 at the Super Bowl, this is the advert. This is Apple sort of breaking down all the barriers sort of away from this sort of dystopian world to this utopian world. So this utopian world of everything being clean and light and airy. And I have to say, that's a project obviously in Cupertino, but that doesn't mean that those principles aren't used in India. So this is a project in India that Pallavi and I worked on, which is actually in Gurgaon. So here, the same principles apply. We did a lot of wind tunnel testing to sort of see how the wind flow would work, especially during monsoons with the rain. Protected everyone. Sort of the entrances. There's a gym, there's a creche, there's a food hall at the moment. Again, sort of amenity spaces and places where people collaborate together. Lots of glass, but good daylight. And actually, the top of it sort of having a 360-degree terrace. This is sort of something that takes on those principles, and it's something very local to here. Again, this is the very corner. This is the executive area right in the very corner. So that's the terrace with the view. But I think there's certainly, all these buildings are sort of coming up to today. So I think the interesting thing is today is that when you do the surveys, and we've done surveys, I think everyone else has done surveys, try and work out what's keeping people in the office and what's keeping them at home, because they're actually balancing out. So of course, the big one, and I think the very large one, is the long commutes. Then, rigid working hours. At home, I can be flexible when I start because no one's on my back. If I go into the office, I can't be that flexible. The childcare is a very big factor of that. The co-workers that are off-site anyway, so you need to talk to them via telelinks anyway. Some people just don't want to go into the office, and there's nothing that anyone can ever really do about that. But then, there's a lack of collaboration. I think in our office, that's a big factor, not having people in the same space talking about the same issues and coming up with solutions. And the communication problems between co-workers. Being in your home sometimes is actually worse for your mental health because you don't have that clear separation. I'm at work, I'm at home. time. That could be the same room in a lot of cases. And also that could be a real challenge. You may not have a space in your home that actually is suitable for working from home. You maybe have roommates or housemates, and it's just not possible. Maybe a lot of noise from outside. And of course, all that sort of ends up with a bit of isolation and loneliness. So there's kind of pros and cons from both sides, and I think that's really where the balance is. And I think this graph is quite interesting because it shows you that nobody is saying we should work from home all the time, and no one is saying we should go to work all the time. So when I said, who works from home, I didn't get a huge show of hands, but maybe there's this idea that you can work from home when you need to. This idea that if you're doing something that just requires complete concentration away from everyone else, you can do that at home. And also, you need to come in the office when you're starting a project and you need to meet everyone, you need to get the strategy down. That's when you have to be in the office. If even one person is sort of dialing in, it doesn't work for everyone. So I think this is what the conclusion really of it all is the real problem is actually not the technology, it's not the behavior, it's not the economics, it's the traffic. And if someone has to go into work and it takes them, well, it's actually 59 minutes, I rounded it up. If it takes you an hour to get into work, and London has this problem, Los Angeles has this problem, I think Mumbai is the 4th worst in the world after Mexico City in terms of traffic and commuting, then this actually is what drives people working from home, because they don't want to lose 2 hours a day. That's the work-life balance they get back by working from home, is they get 2 hours back a day. So that's something that really can't be sort of stubbed at. And I think this is what you generally tend to be, this is the ideal idea that I'm, working from home, I have that biophilia, I have that sort of relaxation. And I think what I was trying to show, and hopefully I was successful, is that really that's what you're competing with. So we have lots of projects that actually are pushing towards that level. I wouldn't go so much as say mixed use, because in the end, mixed use quite often means that other people are coming in, like you have a hotel or you have someone else's retail. In a way, that kind of works against the branding of a project. So the branding of a project is trying to say, come into work because we have a pool, we have a gym. The Apple Park has one of the largest gyms in Cupertino, I think 1,000 square meters or something. So it's actually saying, come into work because it's actually more fun than being at home. And I think that's what we end up being competing with. And this is a sort of a graph showing that, back in sort of 2000, we had roughly 3% of a building as amenity. And now Comcast, one of our later buildings, is 18%. So it's sort of almost 20% of a building is actually amenities. And that's actually sort of is getting along that way to commuting. And they're not so much in sort of date order, but you can kind of see that they're always pushing that, and they've kind of pushed it further and further. So then I think the final slide, which is kind of the answer to that, and we had a conversation just before we started about this, is if you can break down that commute time, then you don't have to worry about childcare, because childcare is within 15 minutes. That your work is within 15 minutes, that your nursery is within 15 minutes. So I think that's where generally a lot of the newer projects that we're sort of working on, certainly in urban design, is sort of trying to pull back to that 15-minute city and really saying that this is the right model. You shouldn't be spending a lot of time commuting, and you shouldn't be spending a lot of time staying at home because you're avoiding the commute. You should actually, the problem is actually with the cities and with the model that's there. So if you change the model and you create these 15-minute cities, then you actually have the right balance, and you don't need to do anything further about that. The rest of it you can rely on behavior or economics, because when you've taken it out, it's one of your biggest sort of problems that you would have with the future of the office, if you like. So in a way, the future of the office needs to be tackled in an urban sense first and foremost. And then I think everything else, I hope I've shown, was always there, and it will continue to adapt and to get better. But without that commuting change, then there's always going to be a bit of an issue with that. So I think that's my final sort of say on the matter. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashley. A wonderful presentation. I have a question. Rather it's just getting information. Is there any study done on the efficiency if people are working on the same floor, or people are working on different floors, or people are working in different buildings? So any study has been done on that, or do you have any idea about?
It's always so sorry. I think there's a big difference between occupier-owned buildings and speculatively delivered buildings, and you would always find in an occupier-owned building that everyone would be as close to that one floor as possible. And in fact, that's one of the reasons, if you look at owner-occupier buildings, the cores are generally kind of dispersed on the outsides and the biggest spaces on the inside. Because even if you are on the same floor and you've got a core in the middle of your building, you can't see the person on the other side of the core. So you don't know what's going on. It's amazing how much of a blinker that can actually do to your workforce. So all of these buildings, again, the Bloomberg, I don't even sort of said, that the building is really for the people, and then the people are productive, then the corporation is productive. And that's one of the reasons you'll find those buildings are always sort of big central spaces with as many people as possible, as functionally possible, on the same floor as possible. And then I think the rest of it comes down to departments. So Apple Campus, it's Apple Park, but it's quite known as Apple Campus, is trying to pull everyone together, but of course because there are so many people. So that when they sort of opened, they were bringing people in product cycles. So they were saying that when you finish your product cycle, you come in and you start a new product cycle, and we'll sit those people together. And our office does exactly the same thing. It's like you're at a project, this project, everyone on that project needs to be as close as physically possible on that project. If you go to a different project, then you go and you sit somewhere else where that project is being done. Our office works that way, Bloomberg works that way, Apple works that way. So I think the answer is yes, efficiency is absolutely there. And that's the aim, is to try and get people in that as close as possible in the same zone. And in that sense, it doesn't really matter if they're in a campus and they're in another building, as long as they're together. So that it comes down to the function of how many people you can fit, really. If you've got a big floor plate or a small floor plate, you want to get them all sitting there.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello, sir. I'm architect Pawan Kumar from Hyderabad. My question is rather technical, and it's related to the Apple Park. So you've mentioned that the slabs were all hollow cast slabs. So does it create any sort of noise when people walk above it, or people who are under it, because of the hollowness or any sort of thing?
No, it doesn't really. It's if you look at a sort of piece of concrete, there's always an element of that that's not doing anything. You know, if the bits on the edge are doing a lot of work, you know, then kind of the old load diagram thing. The load gets smaller in the middle and bigger on the outside, like a bridge. So the hollow sections are in the middle of that. But actually, one thing I didn't mention is because they're exposed concrete soffits, you actually get them heated during the day, and then that slowly disperses at night. So you get this heat sink sort of working, you know, diagonally. And there's a bit of a diurnal change. It's not so great in Los Angeles, and it might be, say, here, for example, you know, in the desert, you don't get these massive changes from day to night, but every little helps. So using that kind of exposed thermal mass is really good. And the center of it doesn't do anything for noise. It's still thick. They're 400 mil thick. They're not going anywhere.
Thanks a lot.